Hello, everyone. This is James Peck. Um, I'm actually doing a PowerPoint presentation today and talk about the seventh anniversary of commemoration of Sewol Ferry Tragedy. If any of you actually don't know about it, but before we go into that details, I just wanted to say that spring is the time where everything is full of blossom, where everything just rises to the shine, where everything's just full of abundance of amount of activities. I could describe spring as the time where everything just go out of darkness during the winter time. And then this is where every people around the world just go outside and basically do a various amount of activities going from spring to the winter to the fall, and then fall into winter is the time when everything is just completely a downtime and everyone's spending at home a lot. And of course, I know that could cause a lot of mental health issues such as depression, anxiety, where everyone is especially staying at home a lot due to COVID and everything that is situation is still going on. And I understand that, imagine in a world where our freedom is taken away from the institution or the government because of COVID-19 crisis, where they're using authority or executive powers to actually limit your freedom. That's exactly what happened last year, where some countries such as Italy, they're starting to do a shutdown or lockdown within the city, where it just devastated and impacted the economy and everything else. But imagine where they decided to take away your own freedom, such as going out or going out dining, or obviously doing dating, for example. That's exactly what happened to South Korea during the 1970s when the Yushin Constitution got implemented at the time when the political crisis was going on. And because they wanted to decided to use the crisis as an opportunity to clamp down opposition, to clamp down your freedom, to clamp down your activities. Imagine a world where we live in that situation where all of our freedom's been taken away from the government or your institution or for someone that you lost. Imagine all of that could happen at any moment or any situation or happen at any time in your life where you lost a loved one due to COVID or anything else, such as tragic accident. This is the conversation that we're going to have today. What happened to these people, especially with Sewol Ferry tragedy that officially happened on April 16, 2014, which was at that time, if I could tell you my personal story, is that I was in freshman at the time during college, and I was not I was not in good school at the time, but I actually, when I first heard about this incident at the time when I was living in a dorm, when I first heard this from CNN, there was this huge banner that was in a yellow caution sign saying that there was actually an accident happened somewhere in South Korea. And basically, it was just flashing, just breaking news, like it just completely gone crazy at the time. And I thought, my first thought was that, okay, was it just a simple accident? Is it going to be it's not going to be a huge thing, such as if it was like if it wasn't a big thing, like if there was a shooting incident happening in America, just like any other type of incident could happen. But after 2 hours later, when I realized, when I went back into the CNN news site, I realized it was really a big, serious issue. They're saying that obviously the accident just happened within the Sewol Ferry. Basically, they could not free people where they're basically trying to rescue people, but they were unable to do that in an ample amount of time. They didn't do it in a time where they're supposed to be rescuing people, quickly as enough. And because of ineffective rescue operation and ineffective communication response from the Coast Guard, from Korea, and the governmental agencies, including the Ministry of Interior and the Presidential Blue House at the time was President Park Geun-hye. She did not respond really swiftly and carefully to the point that she as the president, as the commander in chief, is responsible to have people to be in a public safety where people could travel freely without concerning about their safety. And this whole ferry tragedy wasn't a prominent example of what the government can do to its own people, either through manipulation or through corruption or any type of bargaining system that they have in order to try to clamp down the opposition, or they're trying to not willing to rescue these people because in their point they may think it's too much money involved, too much resources, too much investment that we have to pull out the ship and basically find people who have lost their lives on that ship on that day. I could imagine how difficult it was for me through mentally, because it was not through emotional, but I has actually, when I was following this news update at the time, I actually a lot of times, even till today, whenever there's a news stories actually continues to update because one certain incident that actually lead to corruption or any type of um, miscommunication or actually wrongdoing from any institution, that really angers me and disappoints me a lot, because the institution and the government is representing the people, and the constitutional republic, especially within the United States, have those governmental system where they represent the people, and especially with Congress and their own legislature or their own parliament. And if it was other countries, their job is to represent the people and actually service for the people in order to carry out their duties and responsibilities according to the guidelines of their own country's constitution. And so I think this is one example what the politics can do to its own people. And that's an example what exactly happened here. But before we begin on that, I think this is a good start off a video of BTS. I'm pretty sure everyone in this audience who are viewing me on my lecture know who BTS is. Of course, they're the global phenomenon of K-pop, and they're actually now starting to spread out to the entire world. And this is how they have been known, because of their massive genre of different types of dance genres, music, and any other type of form of music that could resonate the young people. But for me, and personally, I'm not a big K-pop fan as I used to be in the past, because I'm much more like a expert academic, much more like a expert on why these certain issues happen in the first place. I'm kind of like much more like an investigator and detective guy, much more like a direct person, but not like indirectly, where most of the majority of ordinary people would listen to music, watching videos or dramas, which is like kind of narrative to me, because I don't believe in those things. I believe in a realistic, much more authentic approach than if it was something that I just watched like K-pop or K-dramas based on learning from there. I think the only way to learn is basically what exactly happened on this day. And so I think BTS did a really good job, even though I don't know what the thing is on the music genre is talking about. But I think there was an article that was talking about that this was actually resonated the April 16th Sewol Ferry incident. And so I want you guys to listen to this music video, and basically we'll continue on from there to talk about what exactly happened on that day. So I'll just start to play the video here.
시간조차 미워 우리가 변한 거지 뭐 모두가 그런 거지 뭐 그래 네가 널 떠났지만 단 하루도 널 잊은 적이 없었지 나 솔직히 보고 싶은 것뿐만 너를 지우고 그게 너 원하기보단 덜하지 난 너의 부다 연기처럼 말로는 지운다 해도 사실 난 아직 널 보내지 못하는데 난 꽃이 떨어져요 또 조금씩 멀어져요 보고 싶다 보고 싶다 보고 싶다 보고 싶다
So, as you may have heard from this music video from BTS, is actually pretty much shows a synopsis of what I was talking about earlier. That spring is the time where everything full of blossom, where everything escape from the darkness and everything is just full of abundance amount of opportunities, and typically where everybody started to interact and engage and also do a lot of activities during the spring, summer, and everything. What I talked about at the earlier beginning of this introduction about this Sewol Ferry incident. And that video is specifically basically for those people who have lost their lives on that day. And this video, I will show a couple of videos throughout the way as I will talk about in the lectures later on. I'll talk about exactly what happened on that day. But this is a CNN news report at the time when the ferry was actually starting to capsize and starting to sink itself because of overloading, and all of this detail will be shown here as CNN journalist at the time was Kyung-won, which I think she's also Korean American herself, and she is very aware of the Korean culture, similar to me as well as I know aware of the Korean culture, and she will fully explain what exactly was happening on that day through the ferry recordings on the vessel traffic center.
Our ship is listing and may fall. Recordings reveal the frantic ship-to-shore communications as a ferry filled with 476 people, most of them students, begins to list and take on water. At 9:10, VTS, the center that monitors ship traffic, asks, how are the passengers doing? The ferry replies, it's too listed and they are not able to move. 15 minutes later, panic sets in. The ship radios. If passengers escape, can they be immediately rescued? Patrol ship should arrive in 10 minutes. 10 minutes? Yes, 10 minutes. 10 minutes. The chaos and confusion all add up to an unthinkable crime, according to the president of South Korea. The actions of the captain and some of the crew are absolutely unacceptable, she says. Unforgivable actions that are akin to murder. The captain, who is facing 5 criminal charges, spoke about safety 4 years ago in a promotional video. As long as you follow the orders of our crew members, he says, traveling by ship is safer than any other means of transport. Now, that very captain faces tough questions about the orders he gave as his ship quickly sank. I gave orders to evacuate, he says, but that was after he told them to wait because the rescue boats had not arrived yet. Most of those who obeyed are still missing, trapped inside the sunken ferry. And with each passing hour, the likelihood of a survivor being found fades. It is a reality that weighs heavily on the divers. We cry every day and search for the missing people, says a volunteer. So far, they have only recovered bodies. One by one, they are brought ashore. They are 15, 16, and 17-year-old students, parents, and children. A national tragedy. And for the families, a grueling wait for answers.
So that's basically a little bit of view what was going on at the time. I actually watched this CNN coverage, what was going on at the time and exactly what was going on at the time. You see the videos depicting that there's been a lot of chaos, confusion that was going on. And you may wonder that, well, in the United States, we never have this type of accident, especially with the ferries. Of course, that is true. The United States actually have a really, really hefty regulation and a heavy regulation on the transportation industry, and they do take it very seriously. But especially in South Korea, they too, when I researched about them, they also have heavy regulation just like the United States. But I was wondering, you may wondering that how in the world, obviously they fail to provide a public safety and safe for these people who are actually just on their way to a school field trip in Jeju Island at the time when they were actually just did not know anything about what was going on at the time. And they just they simply have to follow is under the captain's order. And I think this next video, Kyung-won, the CNN journalist Kyung-won continues to further explain why did this happen in the first place and why there hasn't been any safety operation rescue quickly enough. And I think she does it very well. And so I want you to continue to listen to what she has to explain all of this.
From anguish to frustration, families of the missing passengers shouting out as they meet with South Korea's president and learn the horrifying details of how the disaster unfolded. This video shows the lifeboats still attached to the ferry as it was sinking. As passengers clung for their lives, CNN affiliate YTN reports only one of the 46 lifeboats was deployed. Video shows passengers sitting inside the sinking ship wearing their life jackets. Why? Because of the ship-wide announcement from the crew. We were told to stay where you are, says this young passenger, so we stayed, but the water kept coming up. South Korea is a culture that prizes obeying your superiors. Students told reporters that their classmates who listened to the stay put order obediently remained in their rooms and likely never made it out. More than 300 of the 475 passengers were high school students on a 4-day field trip. The first of the students' bodies are returning to their hometown. Frustration mounting in the search area, weather, including high waves, slowed the search for possible survivors. Several parents planned to take a boat to the accident site, but turned back after many of them became so upset they fainted. Meanwhile, questions swirled around the captain why he saved himself while hundreds of his passengers, many just children like this rescued 6-year-old girl, were sinking in the frigid yellow sea. I am sorry, he told reporters. I am at a loss of words.
Kyung, I know you had seen some of the text messages between the parents and their children, and I know there's an update on one of them, and the son had texted his mother, "Mom, in case I don't get to say this, I love you." And he sent this to his mother. She at that point had no idea there was anything amiss. She said, "Why? Of course I love you too, my son." And for a while, we heard nothing from him, that he might have died. What have you learned?
We actually have a happy update to this particular text message. We have learned that he was indeed rescued off of the ship. We're not certain if he was picked up in the waters off of the ship or if he was pulled out of the ship directly, but he has been reunited with his mom. This sort of joyful, upbeat news is part of the reason why we're seeing some of these family members who are gathered here at this dockside, who are grieving, who are becoming increasingly frustrated, still holding on to their cell phones, Aaron. They are hoping that somehow they're going to get a text message from their children. Because of stories like this, they're just not getting them.
Just imagine them clutching those phones. I mean, Ken, you mentioned something about the culture in South Korea that was fascinating. People say, well, gosh, if the ship was sinking, even if they said to stay below deck, wouldn't you just run to the top? Wouldn't you run to get out? But that perhaps culture could have played a role in why so many students chose to not abandon ship. What exactly do you mean?
It's really unimaginable for most of us in the Western world, especially those of us who live in America, to imagine staying aboard a sinking ship. But here in Korea, what is prized in children is obedience. Respecting your elders is something that is drilled in you from the moment you were born. And that is something that is very strong in this culture. And so, of course, if these children are told to stay put, and we're talking about children, many of them elementary age, many of them high school age, of course they would stay, even if the ship is sinking. And that's what has families here so upset, because they were following the cultural norms. Those norms, those rules should not have been executed in the way it was on that ship. And that's what we're hearing from these families.
So you already heard from what CNN journalist Kyung-la actually at the time when she was, or journalist at the time, she was talking about the Korean culture and how it factors out that led to this incident, how it actually, the ferry got capsized because of inefficiency of rescue operation. They did not even listen to the proper procedures, what is supposed to be, especially during an emergency crisis, especially like this, when the ferry is capsizing or is about to sink. If it was in the Western world, they immediately go through operation procedures based on the manual, whatever it is that actually told them that you need to evacuate immediately. And it kind of reminds me that during elementary to high school, of course, we used to do a fire drill, and we actually do it during the times, even during non-crisis moment, because you may never know whenever the emergency or any type of crisis could hit at any second. It could hit at any second. Exactly what happened in the COVID situation, for example, obviously the American president at the time, which was President Trump, did not take any action immediately, and very much similar to what President Park Geun-hye, she did, was that she obviously just basically just sit there and just did nothing. She actually just basically did some non-duties, meaning that she was actually doing her just a simple hair braiding. I wouldn't say hair braiding, but simple like a hair makeup or something that she is not listed under the duties of the powers of the president, particularly. It's kind of funny enough to the point that I would say she just did her own leisure time that she's not supposed to do. And instead, what she's supposed to do is to gather up the emergency committee members from the National Security Council, from the Ministry of Interior, from the Presidential Blue Office. She should have called out all of those Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Public Safety, and the Coast Guard. She should gather all of them and basically collaborate and discuss what exactly was going on. And especially during the emergency crisis times, you gotta have to do it immediately. If I was the leader right now, I would immediately do that. I would just not even just sit there and just do nothing, because their lives are at risk. And imagine how much amount of panic I have. Actually, I do have panic attack during the time when there's a crisis like this, because I know that my mind is basically saying that these people are endangering and their dangers are at lives. Their lives are at risk. So their lives are threatened because of lack of rescue responsibility, lack of inefficiency of time of management, as well as making sure that they're rescuing on time to bring the rescue operators, especially the Korea Coast Guard at the time. They did not even had a sufficient amount of communication towards the presidential Blue House. And there has been some miscommunication going on at the time where there has been a lot of mass confusion on exactly what was going on. And, you know, especially during a leadership crisis like this, you're going to have to make a simple, easy second, not easy, but a simple split second decision like this. And if you cannot make the decision like that type of situation, you're probably not going to be ready for any type of crisis in the near future if something like this, like transportation, like Sewol Ferry did, or like COVID-19, where you have to respond really quickly to the point that if you want the disease to not get into your country, you must immediately make a quick second decision. And to share my personal story, I think when I was following on that COVID-19 coverage, I was like wondering, okay, especially when COVID, I got hit really hard in China. And now I was like wondering, okay, in South Korea, there was some COVID cases at the beginning of the time when it was actually done, not that heightened of the tensions, but I was like, okay, in order to actually root out the causes, meaning that in order to bring basically to what do you call it? Basically to what do you call it? To let out the fire, you call it. Let's say if you are obviously trying to basically bring the fire out, basically, or basically trying to prevent the fires from basically from spreading into other types of areas. In order to do that, you have to spray at the root causes of the area, the base of the fire. So in order to prevent from fires to actually get spread out to other areas, you need to spray at the bottom of the base of it in order to prevent from massive amount of fires bringing into the other areas. That's the same thing as the COVID situation. The government should have been immediately, especially with the WHO and other institutions, immediately should have said, we're going to prepare for an emergency crisis by declaring emergency crisis at the beginning. And they didn't do that. They just waited until a week later until they declared emergency crisis. That type of inefficiency, especially with leadership, that is unacceptable to the point that, yes, sometimes you don't want to make a quick decision because there are some cases you can make an error, and it does happen, of course. But at the same time, we're going to have to make a quick decision to whether or not this incident or this type of emergency crisis that we have has the potential to spread out through other outbreaks, or it's going to cause more problems later down in the long term if it does get into a big problem later on. So I think having those mindsets in order to prepare ahead, plan ahead of the future, so that way, in order to prevent some type of crisis like this from getting into a too big situation, you know. And that reminds of another situation with the financial crisis of 07, 08. People actually knew that, especially during the mortgage market, of course, everybody knew that if there are a lot of mortgage-backed securities starting to get much more like, I don't know, we call it like selling these bad loans to bad interest to people who doesn't have credits, who doesn't have good credits, doesn't have good credit profile history, or whatever it is, their incomes, whatever it is, they decide to fabricate it. They should not sold those loans to those people who are not qualified, especially during the times like that. They decided, okay, we're just gonna just fabricate and move things around, basically all the loans, jumble it up to a bad loans and basically combine it together and sell it to the ordinary citizen who does have no idea what the mortgage market it is or what a mortgage loan it is. And that's exactly what happened to the financial crisis of 07 to 09, what we saw in the United States, where all banks are starting to collapse or fail. And, you know, that was the real reason why the government had to bail them out, because in order to rescue them, that's the only thing to do. So that's what they did. And that's how the banks got so big, to the point that you hear the term, especially in the financial world, they call it too big to fail. That's the term. I think this is exactly what exactly happened here in the Sewol Ferry incident, too big to fail. Not the bank, but it's actually the incident. They actually had an insufficient amount of time to actually get the rescue operation underway to the point that they should have make a quick, decisive decision. And so this could potentially put a lot of tensions and pressures among its own people. And because of it, they obviously failed to do so. They failed the rescue operations, lack of time management. There has been some conflict of interest within the Coast Guard and other governmental agencies, as I said, to the Blue House, where President Park Geun-hye actually didn't take any action. She was just doing her normal thing, what an ordinary citizen she's not supposed to do. And it's not under it's not under the duties of the president. And there has been a lot of neglection. Of course, the ferry captain, named Lee Jun-suk, he actually abandoned his own ship, and they actually told him to stay put. But in reality, if it was a realistic rescue operation, the ferry captain should have said, "Hey, obviously our ferry is about to sink. We need to evacuate immediately everybody else." But I think, as Kyung-gon said, according to her video, I think she put it very well to the point. I think culture was one of the most important factors that played into this incident. If you don't listen to your superiors, or if you don't listen to the elders, you will get repercussions. And I think this is the biggest mistakes and biggest failures that we saw, that it should have not played. And it should have been based on the factor of using the Western type of ethical decision that should have been played out in here, but it didn't. And so there has been a lot of criticism. There has been a lot of neglection in public safety. Of course, that's typically Ministry of Interior at the time, or whoever it was. And a lot of it was actually based on the profit versus safety motive, meaning that they just did it for profit reasons, especially with the owner of the Sewol Ferry was actually, we'll talk about more in details, but the biggest cause of this incident is also caused because of the profit. Profit was the big motivator why this thing happened in the first place, because of overloading of the cargo, which also actually expanded the size of the ship, and everything got influenced under this type of accident that just happened, of course. And there has been a lack of enforcement of Korean Register of Shipping. We'll talk more in details in the next slide. And unfortunately, because what happened on April 16 on this day, about 304 people are killed. They were stranded basically, and for those people who are stayed alive, they still have this PTSD and traumatic effects afterwards, because they felt guilt that they were just only the ones who got saved, and basically they did not able to save for other ones. And typically this is what happens in a crisis mode, especially with the like this type of incident, especially with travel related. Particularly, a lot of people felt guilt when they actually should have been the ones who've been save others. Why would they get saved? This is where the guilt of psychological could impact on you, and it could feel a lot of trauma. And I understand why mental health is also part of the importance of why we need to talk about this, and why it is so important to talk it to the survivors. And they're still having some trauma effects even till this day, even 7 years later. And I imagine, how important, how hard for them to overcome this type of resilience, but it's too difficult for them. And of course, I think still to this day, 9 of them are still missing. I think the Korean government, especially with Moon Jae-in's administration, when he took office, they were trying to find the remains. Of course, the ferry did actually got brought into shore. They lifted up. I will tell you the reason why it took about 3 years in the next slide. Again, I think this is a continuation from what exactly happened in that tragedy. Of course, because of this one tragedy, there has been a lot of factors that led to this. 1, negligence. 2, corruption within the government and other agencies. Thirdly, it has to do with inefficient amount of time management. Culture was also the big importance, as I said earlier. And lastly, it has to deal with, especially, is the lack of training among the crew members and the captain. And also, it's just part of big influence of what exactly happened on that day, is that ferry captain was so ignorant, incompetent, and also he obviously did not do what he's supposed to do as a ferry captain, which is to provide public safety for his own people. And that really kind of shamed me on that day when I was doing this investigative research for my literature class. And my professor, if I could tell you in my personal story, we actually gathered on that end of that week, and we actually had to do a research paper. And my professor actually tell us to brainstorm, list of different topics was going on at the time. 2014 was the worst year, I will tell you. There has been a lot of things going on at the time. And one of the classmates in my literature class raised her hand. She said, why don't we actually let somebody to investigate the Sewol Ferry tragedy? And so I was kind of shocked because I was living in an area where it's not like heavy Asian communities population, but she raised her hand and she told about it. And I said, okay, professor, I decided I want to do this investigative research on Sewol Ferry tragedy because it was so important to the time that I had to raise awareness and advocacy and activism. And before then, I had some activism and advocacy, did it for over 20 years. And this one was actually hit my nerves to the point that it needs to be raised a concern and awareness throughout the public, including the school, the students, and throughout the entire world, that they need to understand what exactly was going on. So I did those research and basically figured out all the 4 things that led to the cause of this incident. Actually turned out it was part of it: negligence, corruption, profit, basically just lack of inefficiency within the government agency of rescue operation. And because of that, actually, I did my own part, but at the same time, I kind of felt shortfall, basically not just doing much enough for these people. But the only thing I know is that I did my own part to spread awareness about what exactly happened to this Sewol Ferry tragedy. At a time when I was 19 years old, at the time when I was actually enlisted in the military, of course, that was the same year. And of course, it was a tough time for anybody, including myself, trying to understand this issue, trying to overcome it and basically understand what was going on. But now I think I have full understanding of what was going on, because what happened after Sewol Ferry becomes a big problem. And I actually knew that South Korea's political situation was getting much more problem. And it was about to lead into authoritarianism, not directly, but indirectly, to the point that it wasn't look like a dictator, but it was like a dictator. President Park, of course, if you don't know about South Korean political history, I think she was the daughter of the father Park Chung-hee. Of course, he was really ruled with the iron fist in South Korea at the time when they were actually undergoing economic development. And so because of her DNA and her father's past history of leading the country with the iron fist, she did the same as well. And she publicly announced in 2012 presidential election in South Korea at the time, she said, I will never become like my father. But apparently, unfortunately, she did. And she underestimated it. She thought that when she officially became president, she became a different person, just like anybody else. Whoever holds the power in the presidency actually has an abundant amount of power that she could do whatever the heck she wants to actually undermine the institution, and also basically abusing the power of the presidency. And that's exactly what she did. After this tragedy, unfortunately, there was established an independent investigation, which took about at least 3 years. Of course, I said the Sewol Ferry got raised after 3 years, and most likely it has to do with political motive. That time, conservative government was holding power at the time for almost like a decade. And because of that, they actually decided, we're just not going to care about it. They actually trying to interfere in the investigation committee. They were trying to find a way to remove the independent investigation committee. And because of that, there has been a lack of governmental oversight and prevention measures. And for those people responsible for this incident got captured and arrested, including the owner of this ship, which owned by Chung-In-chi Marine Company at the time. He also got arrested, but at the same time, he actually killed himself. He basically just suicided himself after the police actually were on the manhunt of this man. The funny thing was that, if I could tell you a personal side of the story, when this was all was going on, when my parents and I were watching the Korean live television when was going on, when the Sewol Ferry and all the updates, the news update was going on, my father was actually telling me, hey, James, why don't we actually go after Mr. Yu and find a way to actually capture him so that we can make a $500,000 in bucks of money. And I was like, no, I obviously don't have the time for that. We don't have the money and resources to actually go there and travel to South Korea and then basically have to hunt this man. If it was like a military operation, no, it was like a much more like a funny joke. But I'm not trying to make it funny as of today because of commemoration. I know it's really inappropriate, but on a personal side, that was the thing that where he was the guy who was the owner, and he actually did it for profit reason. And so, of course, obviously they got charged. Of course, right afterwards, somebody who, especially when the entertainers industry who are voicing their support for these Sewol Ferry Tragedy and the victims, but if they say anything about against the governmental policies, especially for these people, they were blacklisted. And that did not came in until we found out under the corruption when Park Geun-hye actually got impeached in 2017, and all of the news sources started to come up, uncover her administration wrongdoings. And basically, this is where I find out about that artists and actors within the Korean entertainment industry were blacklisted because of freedom of speech, because they were pro-liberal. They're saying they are not siding with pro-conservative. And I don't understand to this day that how could a government could blacklist entertainers just simply because of their political activism. Just be, hey, let me ask you something. If you're saying if I have the ability to blacklist you simply just you're pro-liberal or pro-conservative or pro-libertarian or something other than political ideologies that's not recognized today, does it make sense to the point that the government has the right to actually censor you just because of your political beliefs or your religious belief or whatever it is that this is not only happening in South Korea, this is happening all around the world where they use and undermine their power to restrict freedom of speech because of their political opinions or opposition or dissensus, whatever it is, that prohibits them undermine of own critical thinking. And this is the problem why I think the government should get out of their backs on political freedom and let the citizen have the freedom to say what they wanted to say and what they have been willing to give them the improvements of what the government needs to be doing, especially with policy making. That's a concept of feedback. But a lot of times the government does not want to hear feedback. It's just like saying if it was a human person. Sometimes a lot of people would say they don't want to hear feedback because, I don't know, it makes them feel bad. What happens if you don't give feedback? Does that person have the potential to grow as a person in the professional or personal development? You're probably not going to be a growth person or growth mindset if you're not willing to understand the feedback, or you don't accept the feedback if you don't want to. I mean, it doesn't make sense, but unfortunately, this is what exactly happens when the government is actually kind of pissed off or actually kind of trying to find a word, but I'm thinking like much more like offensive, like they feel criticized and feel offended that they just don't want to hear anything negatively. And so that's what usually happens when the government decides to take away your own rights and blacklist you. And especially this happened in the McCarthyism during the Cold War in the United States, where they also blacklisted these Hollywood filmmakers and actors, including ordinary citizens who actually had jobs and they actually lost their jobs because of federal investigation on McCarthyism. And they created the HUAC, House Un-American Committee Intelligence. And because of that, a lot of people lost their jobs, and it affected them emotionally and intelligently. That exactly what led to here as well. I think that's not a right thing to do. And of course, later, Supreme Prosecutor General also launched an investigation. At the time, it was Mr. Yoon Suk-yeol, which he's still in power, but unfortunately, he actually resigned last year because of what happened to criminal justice reform that was going on at the time. Literally, I could tell you in another lecture about what was going on, political crisis at this point in South Korea. But all of those charges that were fully responsible for those incidents regarding to Sewol Ferry actually got dropped this year because of the Supreme Prosecutor General office and the teams who were hearing this case were saying there's a lack of insufficient amount of evidence to show that these people are responsible for the incident. They're saying there's no direct connection, but unfortunately there is a direct connection. They have all the evidence, but I think this is all part because of political motive. So I think the South Korea political situation is really not under control to the point it's about to undermine its own people. And I'm really fearing that that's going to happen in the next couple of years when whoever the next South Korea's president, which I think is due until next year, I think I'm afraid it's about to get into a conservative government from based on analysis and prediction and what I've been following on the news. But you could call me as an analyst on that, but I think that's where they're heading to. Shortly, of course, after this incident, there has been Coast Guard disbanded the agency. And then there has been some compensation of victims according to the judge order that has been issued 2 years ago. There has been delayed investigation because, as I said, interference. They're trying to cover it up. They decided they don't want to hear it because it could potentially undermine their political influence, especially with the conservative government. And I think there has been a lot of corruption within the presidential Blue House, which compared to equivalent to the presidential official residence to the White House. And of course, I think also the blacklisting, of course, that also caused it to had to the influence for the National Intelligence Agency and other government agencies carried out orders to blacklist these actors and entertainers. And I think that's really unacceptable to the point that they had to do it because they're doing it for political reasons. Lastly, I think because of all of this inefficient, incompetent of the president Park at the time, this actually led to a spark of outrage of protest called the candlelight protest, which was one of the largest massive protests I have ever seen in Korean history. It went over at least 12 million people, according to the total statistics. I may have to figure that out how many people were participating, but it was large than any other protests around the country in the world. And basically, news media were just like flashing all of this, saying that South Korea has a lot to learn from the rest of the world. They do. I think the world needs to learn about how they actually undergo these protests. It lasted for at least a year from 2016 to 2017. Shortly after, that's what caused President Park to be impeached from the courts, and officially Moon Jae-in actually got elected to office through a vacancy election. And there has been a lot of government structural changes within employment through ethical integrity. There has also been a restructuring within the Department of Public Safety, how they organize it. And they also decided that President Moon Jae-in designed his administrations to reemphasize the safety culture. That's a lot of information to be taken on. I think you probably don't understand about it, but I think all of it summarizes the impacts of the Sewol Ferry, what exactly was happening, and what the results were led after this Sewol Ferry tragedy, because there has been a lot of following up news updates, and it's still today, I think South Korea political situation is still under dire crisis to the point that it's not been shown on the media. But I'm a political analyst to the point that I know I could predict the future, and based on what we see in the news and everything, what has been told from the Korean news media and the American news media, and what we see in the foreign policy in the world. And that is why it is so important to know what's going on in the rest of the world, to actually figure out and to understand what led to this incident, this tragedy, or this type of problem that caused it in the first place. This is basically a map of where the ferry was going. Of course, this is the ferry route at the time. Of course, it was leaving from Incheon on April 15th, and then it was heading their way to Jeju Island. As I said earlier, they were heading for a school field trip, just simple daily activities that most of the high school students they do. South Korea has this culture of basically at the end of their senior year, they actually take a field trip, and just basically it's a sign of basically congratulating them for 12 years of education, and now they're about to move into the college education system. And because of that, they basically think this is their birthday gift, I would call it, based on their culture. And I'm not sure this is similar to other Asian culture as well, but this is a map of where the route was going at the time. Of course, it left during the evening on April 15th. Imagine how scary it is actually leaving in the evening, but unfortunately for me, I'm just rather just traveling during the time and during the night. I would just rather travel during the daylight because it's much more safer than if it was like during the night, because you don't really know what's going to get thrown at you or what's going to happen in the next couple of hours if something's about to happen. But this is the track map. So I think I touched a little bit about what led to the capsize of the ferry. I think the real reason I think I mentioned was the oversize overload. Let me point out to you that imagine that if you're, I don't think it doesn't not take that much amount of effort to actually know the engineering concept. I don't think you don't need a PhD degree in engineering to figure out what exactly happened to this ship. Because of the oversize, you see here, if you see the infographics, you see here that this is the original Sewol Ferry, what it looked like before the accident. But if you see here the diagram and everything, this is the crew areas, this is the passengers, this is a vehicle cargo decks where they shipped out the vehicle, where they store their vehicles in additional cabins. So if you look at the length and the width and the maximum passenger capacity is much more higher than what it used to be, meaning that this is not the recommendation according to what the Korean Register of Shipping would actually recommend, but the maximum recommendation that the cargo weight needs to have, it says is about 987 tons according to what it says over here. But unfortunately, the day of when they were heading to travel to Jeju Island at the time when they were traveling, the actual cargo weight was actually reported 3,608 tons, which is about 24 times the size of the recommended cargo weight that is actually recommended from the Korean Register of Shipping. Remember, actually, Korean Register of Shipping is under the Department of Interior and is under the Department of Public Safety. And basically, they're in charge of basically regulating and basically inspecting all of this, evaluating all the cargo tons to see if they follow the transportation guidelines for transportation recommendation and all of this technical aspect. If they follow the guidelines, make sure that they pass the inspection. Just like if you're, say if you're here in the United States, for example, every single time when the government from the U.S. Department of Transportation or National Highway Transportation Safety Administration gives you that mail, and I'm not sure if you're from other countries, you might not understand what I'm talking about, but usually in the United States, they receive official mail saying that your car is under recall. And when that happens, typically what I do is immediately go to my dealership and basically they need to fix the problem. Of course, 100% of the time when they fix that recall, basically they have to do it they have to do it the right way, meaning that they have to follow all the regulation and guidelines that is specified under the U.S. Department of Transportation, what it says. So that way they basically make sure that the car is fixed, whatever the causation of that problem is. But in South Korea, for example, they did not go through that process. When it did, I'm assuming for those people who were working as regulators, it's whoever it was, the safety regulators at the time, they probably either fabricated the report to say that, okay, obviously we're just not gonna, write it down as an accurate report because we don't know it. And sometimes, I've seen this in jobs daily, like when the workforce where somebody decided to manipulate the numbers or just fabricate the numbers, or obviously inflated the numbers. You may think, especially any type of industry that you go into, especially financial things, you may have to be careful on that, especially with financials. You don't want to inflate your numbers because somebody will find out later on that you underestimated or over-reported the income or financial report from your company simply because, I don't know, you cannot even guess or estimate, or obviously don't know could not make an educated guess to the point that how much amount of this weight or this financial size that can be much more reasonable or suitable for your organization. And this is exactly what happened here. I think the regulators, if I was them, I think they didn't make an educated guess, or they actually didn't make the specific right target number to the point that they decide, you know what, we're just gonna be careless. We're gonna just bypass this regulation. And I think this is what exactly happens. I know sometimes this is not an easy thing to do, but I think you're gonna have to be very careful to the point that you have to balance it out between what is the reasonable amount of number and which is the reasonable amount of educated guess, where I have to balance it out to reach the right target point. And I think this is why I think they actually kind of shortfall on themselves, that they just did not put it into the right number, or obviously they didn't inspect it carefully because they thought they just don't care about it. No one's going to find out about it. This is what's actually going to later cause the corruption or conflict of interest later on because of simple inadequate inspection or regulation that you didn't follow. And I think that's why in today's world that we have to be very careful about it. And so that's what likely caused this accident. This is a picture of the photo. Of course, Sewol Ferry was actually not actually bought in from Korea. It was not built in Korea. First of all, it actually, according to the technical history or history of the ship of the ferry was going on, it actually bought it from A-Line, Japanese A-Line ferry at the time. It was bought by it was actually built under the Mitsubishi heavy industry at the time. This was built during the 1990s, of course. This was way before I was born. Um, and basically, you see here in design, this is what it used to be. This is what the ferry looks like. This is what it happened after they modified the ship. So if I give you that diagram, I think the next diagram, of course, actually it does not say it, but I think this diagram, what they did was, funny thing was in engineering, I think this is where ethical comes into a huge play. Imagine that you actually have to increase the number of passenger size. And imagine you have to increase the number of cargoes or vehicle cargo decks, or if you had to increase the size of the decks. In physics, or if you say, I'm not saying chemistry, but in physics or science or scientifically, we'd say it. If you increase the number of size of the passenger, or you're just saying, let's modify it around, let's change it around the number of size, the number of passengers, whatever it is, do you think it has the ability to maintain or stabilize that friction of the force, or they actually maintain that stabilizing that to balance the weight? Do you think that's going to happen? Probably not. Because how in the world would you actually increase the number of size of the crew areas and passengers at the same time you're saying you could actually have no accident? You couldn't. You couldn't prevent that. And that is the reason why it caused this. And originally, this is what the original design was. This was bought from Japan, but when it got into South Korea and when it got shipped out there, the Cheongjin Marine Company, which owned by Mr. Yu at the time, Yu Byung, he decided that his business was not going very well at the time, and he decided to take a shortcut. So what he did was he bought this ship, and what he thought is, okay, if you want to raise the profits, raise the passenger, increase the number of passenger size, and increase the amount of weight, that would actually bring a lot of profit. And this is where the profit over safety motive was actually a huge factor, what led to the accident. You see this passenger, you see here, it was smaller, but here it just went bigger. You see the technical specification engineering got modified to the point that it actually went over the recommended weight according to the Korean Registry of Shipping that I showed you in the diagram from the previous slide. So unfortunately, because of that, they just decided that they just wanted to take a shortcut. And so because of that, that actually led to capsizing and basically sank the ship really quickly because of oversizing. And so this is basically the timeline of what was going on, of course, and you see that. And basically, the rescue effort requires a lot of divers in order to rescue the efforts. You can imagine how much amount of manpower or a lot of human personnel that requires you to actually get the people out of the ship in order to actually do the rescue efforts. Unfortunately, they didn't do that really in an ample amount of time, and some of them actually caused some mental health issues, such as PTSD and other type of issues that has been going on to the point that it actually caused them to have some mental instability. And you can imagine how hard it was for them to actually to rescue that effort. And I remember that time when I was watching this news media, 24 hours actually, I could imagine how hard it was for them to go through this type of incident. And unfortunately, because of incompetence and lack of time management of rescuing these people in an ample amount of time, that what caused the incident. But this is a time on exactly what was going on every single minutes. And you see that I think they did it to the point that they just aren't able to rescue on time. And that's really the sad thing that I think we need to remind ourselves when we travel through airplane or ferry or train. Just remind yourself that when you're getting on that transportation, whatever you're going through, always remember that something's about to happen and you have to prepare for that. Because if you don't, and you're being complacent about it, meaning if you're taking freedoms for granted, something bad is going to happen. And you need to have some type of prevention measure or some type of plan in order to make sure that you're not going to get into a where you're about to lose your lives. And exactly this is what happened. And you need to have an evacuation plan or some type of plan. And I think the whole entire world needs to understand exactly what caused this incident, so that way the future generation or the future incidents will not happen similar like this. Because I hate it to the point that people make same mistakes over and over again because they do not learn the history. And that is really upsetting to me to the point that they just don't care. They're just being careless. But that's okay. I mean, people make mistakes, but if you make the same mistake over and over again, I'm not gonna, uh, you know, not gonna be to the point that obviously I'm not gonna work with you because you just did not learn the mistakes, basically. So that's what it's all about. And of course, this is in Korean, but what it's saying is it's kind of like a, I am not sure if you saw an FBI type of image where it's kind of looked like this, where they want, it's like, it's basically saying Mr. Yu Byung-un, or actually his son, the most wanted people are looking for them. And basically they were on the manhunt, where the police actually at the time told him that you're going to give you a reward of $500,000. His son is actually costing about $300,000 if you find them. And I remember telling you a story about where actually I had the family dinner table talking about this discussion. I was saying we don't have time for going to Korea and chase these bad people. I mean, I actually do resonate a lot that I want bad people to bring justice, and basically bring those people who are held responsible. I believe in that, but unfortunately, realistically, it's too hard to deal with, because it takes a lot of resources and investment in order for me to get out there and basically find these two people. The first question is, how am I going to find these people? I mean, probably not even like even police officers could do a very, very better job in order to do that. So it's looked like that's what it was, and that's my personal side of the story. As I said, I think we talked about a lot of history of the MV Seoul. This is what I talked about, of course, and we actually turned out that it was all because of political motive and profit motive, and not based on safety issues. So that's what I was talking about in the earlier slides, which I'm not going to talk about it. But remember that because of Cheongjin Marine Company's financial records actually said that because of their loss of income, they decided, you know what, we're just going to use travel industry as an example, where they're going to increase the size of the ship, increase the number of passengers, increase the amount of, let's modify it around basically. So that way they can earn more money. That's how they did it. And that was the reason why it became so unstable to the point that that's what led to the ship's capsizing. And we already went through the timeline events I showed you, but I think again, what led to this Sewol Ferry tragedy is because it was too much overload, too overloaded, too much cargo weight, as I said. Prosecutors, of course, they also determined that it was because the ferry was not properly secured. And that's really kind of upsetting to the point that how in the world, if you are part of the transportation industry, that you need to follow the simple basic guidelines of what the transportation rules are. Because in my personal side of the story, I was a bus driver. I got a Class B license under the Georgia Department of Driver Services. We go through a lot of training because it requires a lot for us to learn about how serious it is for us to provide public safety and protect its citizens who are on that bus, and basically provide a safety route, meaning that provide the safety to their own destination. And that's the job of transportation industry, and that's the job of bus drivers as well. It was a long 2 months, or I think 3 months of training that I had to go through, and I actually finally got a Class B license. Getting that Class B license is like a golden ticket for me, because it requires me a long hours of training, but also learning how to drive as a bus driver and actually learn how to curve is much more bigger than if it was similar, like if it was like compact cars, like a sedan or any type of cars, like smaller than that. And I know how much of an impact and risk it involves driving that passenger vehicle, or if it was like a bus driver, or if it was like a truck driver. I haven't got a Class A license yet. I have no intention to be a truck driver, but the whole point of what I'm talking about is basically the importance of how much transportation risk is involved, especially with passengers, especially with citizens who are trying to go into the destination that you're going to in order to provide them safety. That's what responsibility and accountability is all about. And that's what transportation does, especially. You need to take transportation as a seriousness as if it was an investment or an asset to protect these people. Because if you did something wrong doing it in the middle of your career or whatever it is, you could get held liable for it. And you may think passengers, you may think you're taking for granted, but at the same time, if you're facing like a lawsuit, you'll be held liable for it based on the number of passengers who are actually got injured. That could cost billions of dollars. That is not even a good way to start off your career in order to do that. So it serves as a reminder that anything in life should not be taken for granted. It's not. And we should remind ourselves that this is the reminder of what exactly happened on that day that actually cost 304 people lost their lives simply because it was inadequate amount of training, inadequate amount of procedures, inadequate amount of knowledge about how much amount of transportation regulation that was involved. And basically that because of that, it actually got capsized because of that. As I said, because of the cultural influence, that was actually the biggest influence of what led to this accident because of culture-driven success in South Korea, including other Asian countries as well as following the self-obedience model, meaning that if you don't follow your superiors, you'll get repercussion. It's kind of like that. So, and of course, he abandoned the ship and that actually told him not to move, which is unusual. It's not the norm. If you're from the America, for example, they would immediately tell you to actually evacuate quickly as possible. And they actually follow that procedural guidance according to what it says on their manuals, whatever their blueprint of what the transportation evacuation is. And I'm thinking this has typically not been talked in the media a lot, but I think the crew member, one of the inexperienced crew member, as I said, they had a lack of training. They actually steered their ship really too quickly at the time. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's kind of similar to if you're jacking up the car or if you're making a sudden sharp left turn. For example, if you're driving a car, for example, and you have to immediately steer to left to the turn of your wheel immediately, guess what's going to happen to your car? It's probably going to get jerked, but at the same time, it's going to overturn your car, meaning that it's going to go roll over. So I think this is where I think we need to have some education about transportation and driver behavior and driver safety. And this is why we need to, this is the reason why we go through these trainings and regulation that is required in order to get a driver's license at the beginning of your age of 18. And if you're trying to get a Class C license, and a lot of times young people just don't get the heck of idea, why do we go through this? Because of your safety, because of your impact of potentially getting an accident. It's going to increase the probability of getting an accident if you don't go through this training. And a lot of times people just don't get the idea or understanding why transportation and safety industry are existing in the first place. Because of your safety. We want you to be safe. We want you to go into your destination without some repercussion or happening into your in your daily life. We don't want that. And that's the reason why importance of safety through traveling and transportation, driving a car, whatever is simple in your life. This is why I'm talking about. Don't take freedoms for granted at all. And I don't know how many times I have to emphasize this throughout this lecture, but this is what keeps me upset all the time when people just don't know the heck of an idea where I'm coming from. And so I think it requires a lot of self-knowledge, understanding what exactly happened to the root cause in order to get a better understanding of why these incidents could happen. And of course, I think communication was the biggest barrier what led to this. I think they know how to communicate, but I think they just had to delay it purposely. They did it on purpose. I think it's because they just were confused about who to talk to or who to talk to their superiors or whoever it was. They're basically based on this cultural influence driven, based on their own superiors. They should have not gone through that. Regardless of position, regardless of title, they should immediately, whoever it was, if it was their juniors or senior or whoever it was, they should immediately pick up the phone call and call the emergency, federal emergency services, whatever, if they should call the Korean Coast Guard to immediately notify and saying that, hey, our ship is sinking. We need to get the evacuation crew up directly to the evacuation site where they're supposed to be. So I think this is what led to it. And I already told you about modification. That was one of the reasons why they failed, because of the lack of lack of regulation that in play because of self-regulation on this industry that have been played. And I think that's one of the real reasons why they should not fabricated or inflated their numbers because of that. Now, I think lastly, to close it out, has them has never been a similar transportation or maritime tragedies in modern history. I would say world modern history, because there were similar incidents like this. I would tell you there's a lot. But the most notable events, what happened was, if you're, I'm not sure if some of you out there who are kind of like space enthusiastic or astronaut, if you want to become astronaut some days, I'm pretty sure there are some of you out there who wants to be a astronaut, going to the space, learning about new planets, whatever it is. But I did two incidents happened in the United States where Space Challenger, Space Columbia. There were similar incidents. What exactly happened was they actually did not go through basically adequate inspection, to the point that they actually failed to fix basic stuff, like say if it was O-rings, for example, if they got broken or if it got teared up. That's one of the reasons what caused this explosion of Space Challenger in Columbia, because of lack of adequate maintenance. And because of that lack of adequate maintenance that was required to follow the basic safety procedures, that what's led to the accident. Both of these Space Challengers and Space Columbia, what exactly happened. And it costed a lot of those people who actually were on service, it costed their lives. A lot of people who were on board were actually dead. You can actually find this on YouTube if you want to figure out exactly what happened to these accidents with Space Challenger, Space Columbia. Boeing Dreamliner, I think this is really I wouldn't say unknown, but I think that time, I think we were kind of like in middle or high schoolers at the time. But I remember clearly what actually happened to the Boeing Dreamliner. It's actually because of lack of adequate maintenance, but also innovation of technology because of the battery. I think batteries are now starting to get much more advanced and much more quickly developed. But here's the thing that I'm kind of concerned about, is that the cost of innovation actually led to the cost of risk. If you develop the technology really too quickly, what's going to happen is there is a increase of risk of potential accident or potential some type of incident could happen. That's what exactly happened to Boeing Dreamliner. I think it's because of a battery that was much more efficient. They believed that this would potentially bring some profits, but unfortunately, it cost a lot of some people's lives, impacts in the financial system within the Boeing. And there was a similar incident, of course, 2 years ago with Boeing as well. But I think that's one of the things that they should have been taking a lesson on, but unfortunately, it carried on until very recent to the tragic accident happened in Boeing 737 MAX, which I will talk about in just a few minutes. But Costa, I'm sorry for my I'm sorry for my pronunciation today. It's not very working. Costa Concordia disaster. This one, I think I totally remember. It was regarding to the ship, very much similar to what happened to Sewol Ferry, but it was not because of all the things I talked about that kind of related to governmental influence. It wasn't. It's a little bit different. This one was much more like a incompetence of a crew member of ship, the captain of the ferry, whoever was in charge of this ship. He actually decided to abandon the ship and did not follow the basic regulation. He didn't follow the basic safety law. And because of that, he actually got in jail and basically got repercussion for it, because he actually didn't follow the transportation regulation or the safety measures in order for them to actually have a safety rescue operation. He didn't do that. He just abandoned the ship. So it's a little bit different from what happened in Sewol Ferry, where the government and corruption got played a lot, but this one is not. This was actually a specific individual who decided he does not want to save his own people. And basically he's saying he's being incompetent at the same time. It seems like in his perspective, he does not want to save people. He's just like a jerk. I would call him as like a jerk or incompetent, and he doesn't know about how to become a crew member or a ferry captain. He doesn't deserve to be in that position. The Asiana Flight 214 incident, this one is much more kind of similar to Sewol Ferry, but I think it was part of the cultural driven, not success, but I think it was because of self-obedience that I talked about, where you're supposed to respect your own superiors and basically follow their orders instead of making your own decision. Like if it was a democratic model of leadership, they didn't do that. They basically did it authoritative, where they made a lot of confusion. And because of that confusion, and because they had to follow their superior orders, based on their influence, they actually got caused that action. Basically, what happened was that Asiana Airlines, when they actually hit that seaport, basically when they hit that, basically it just hit that flag of a plane. So if it was like that airlines, for example, you see that tail of the flag of the wing, whatever you call it. Here's the wing here, both sides of the plane, but there's at the end of the tail of that plane, basically it hit that plane basically dramatically to the point that it just hit that seaboard. Basically, it caused the accident, and that's what led to that accident. Of course, incompetence and lack of management decision. Again, I already told you about Sewol Ferry. I'm not going to go in detail. Boeing 737. This was much more like similar to Sewol Ferry. It's much more they modified the plane actually, and the real reason why is because if you look at the history of Boeing and how much of competition that we're in, it was very severe. Boeing for several years was focused on engineering and ethics. It was much more like ethical company that you had to follow in the 1990s and so on into the 2000s. But unfortunately, I think in the mid 2000s when Dreamliner and then when they're starting to go after Airbus, which Airbus actually has a really good safety standards and really a good efficiency planes. They do follow the EPA and all of the fuel efficient plane that they have to make. And they said basically the Airbus is actually kind of, I wouldn't say the word steal, but they're actually gaining much more competitive edge than if it was Boeing. And so what in Boeing, in their perspective, I think what they thought is, crap, obviously, Airbus is starting to take over the world and basically saying we're losing momentum in American company. So it's like kind of influence the impact of economic nationalism kind of into a huge play where America is starting to lose its own dominance because imagine that Airbus was taking over the world and basically Boeing was no longer the leader of American airplane or airline aviation industry anymore because as the brand started to lose its influence because of lack of ethical decision or lack of treatments to its workers because they actually had to follow the safety orders engineer in order to make a better airlines and better airplanes, but at the same time make a better safety measure so that way people can trust on the institution and the company itself, especially with Boeing, so that way they could travel any way they want. They could travel in the airplane and say, hey, this plane is safe. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. And because they had to shortcut, they had to modify the airplane because of the size of the weight, very much similar to what happened to Sewol. They actually had to adjust the fuselage. They moved it around somewhere to the point that it's kind of lifted up to the point of the measurement that is exceeding the measurement weight of the plane. At the same time where they actually decided, okay, now it's starting to get imbalanced. So what they had to do is like, let's obviously kind of change it around in here. So they added the technology called MCAS, the maneuver characteristic augmented system, where the plane actually automatically tells you, okay, here's basically in order to balance the aircraft, we're going to tell you to go lift it up and basically lift it down and basically, it adjusted based on the airplane distance and the aircraft and where it's heading to. And because they have to go through a lot of shortcuts and everything, that led to a huge accident. What happened to Lion Airlines and then Ethiopian Airlines that happened in 2018, 2019, that caused a lot of accidents. And fortunately, what it resulted was basically there has been so much anger, public outcry among Ethiopians and Americans and the whole worldwide abroad for those who are on that aircraft. And basically, there has been a lot of mistrust. And what resulted was they actually had to pull out the aircraft airline 737 Max's orders. And you remember, I'm not sure if you're following the news at the time, but President Trump actually orders to pull out all of the aircraft orders that are associated with Boeing 737 until the government decided to get involved and decided to go through records of history of maintenance and regulation that they have to go through. But they actually have to self-regulate themselves, similar to what happened to Sewol Ferry. Is very much identical what exactly happened. That caused a lot of impacts on their lives. So I think that pretty much when I heard this incident, in my head, I was like, oh my God, I was like, how in America, especially in the United States, have one of the most safety records, meaning that they have the good safety records around the world, that basically they follow the regulation and everything. They have the good safety records they do. How could this thing like this could happen? And I think that Dennis Muhlenberger was the CEO at the time. He was the chairman. All he had said to the public was basically, I'm sorry, I feel like, this is a really bad thing and this is troubling. But unfortunately, I think he just probably not literally meant it. But I think for him, if I was his perspective, if I told him, I would say get fired from your job, get fired from your position as a chairman because you don't deserve to be in that position as a chairman because of simple ignorance and so incompetent to the point that you just did it for your own profits. You decided to carry your own profits, and basically you just decided to take away people's money, and basically you just go home. That type of mentality is unacceptable to the point that I think United States of America, especially in the United States, do need to do better. At the same time, they know better to actually uphold the highest standard in their leadership within any organization in the world, and they should have been, but they failed to do so because they had to take shortcuts. They decided, you know what, let's turn things, let's move things around, let's modify it, let's fabricate it, whatever the heck it is for them in order to make sure that they move forward into their organization so that way they could look good on their financial reports when they go to investors. This is why I think a lot of you, especially if you're in the investor world, if you're in a nonprofit organization, or if you're for profit, if you're trying to be a venture type of related stuff out there, always remember that you gotta have to follow the ethical and make a right decision. Because what exactly happened, all of this incident I laid out to point out to you is actually exactly the reason why it cost a lot of people's lives. And I think in my organization, if I created my own mission and my own values, integrity, ethical, and trustworthy is the number 3 things that is most important to me. There's tons of my values I can follow. The real reason is because if you don't follow these ethical decisions, you're immediately fired from my job. There is no reason for you to obviously be in my position to the point that you're just a simple, ignorant, and basically lack of self-awareness, and you don't care about his own people. And in contrary, when I'm in customer service industry, a lot of people saying I don't care about his own people. They're wrong. It's because obviously I'm not in a position where I'm a CEO, but I deserve to be in CEO right now at this moment, but unfortunately I'm not. There's a lot of learning to need to do. I understand that. Getting to grow too quickly is not a good idea. But I just wanted to know, this lecture that I'm talking about today is not only important about this incident tragedy, it's all about the importance of how people can trust the institution, can trust you to actually lead your own job. And I talked about a lot of different topics from leadership, regulations, safety records, engineering, government, institution. A lot of multi-stakeholder approach that I used today was emphasizing what I talked about in the lecture today. It is the importance of why you need to learn how to be multidisciplinary in an uncertainty period, in an uncertainty world. We're living in an uncertainty and unprecedented world since the World War II in our grandparents' generation. This is the reason why it's so important to actually have the discussion like this in the meetings, in the point that you guys actually need to know about this, especially at a young age, to understand what exactly is going on and basically what the heck is going on in the world. And you see, there's a lot of this. Actually, it's not only talking about Korea, it's talking about the United States, it's happening in Italy, it's starting to happen in Malaysia, whatever it is that I talked about. All of this is basically a contemporary world society, what I'm talking about. So have some passion to actually understand different types of cultures, different types of issues. I know about all 17 SCG, not even kidding. I have 20 years of experience from different types of nonprofit organizations, serving as advisory boards, board of directors. Even today, I actually do all of those things because I deserve to take an ample amount of time outside of my job to actually do those things in order to make improvements to change in their organization, but also improve in their people's lives. That's why it's important for me to get involved in every organization, whatever issue it is. I could be in every single committee: science, technology, agriculture, transportation, education, science, or there's only hundreds of thousands of issues going on today. There's a lot of interconnection. That's what I'm saying here. The whole idea of what I'm talking about today is that multidisciplinary is so crucial and important of why people need to understand that all of the issue that you're dealing with is interconnecting and intersecting with other issues. That's exactly what I'm talking about in this lecture today. I think nobody would talk about it right now. I don't think nobody would. Nobody has the same amount of capabilities or skills that I have because I've been studying for over 20 years because of learning, because of researching, lifelong learner. Continue to be curious, understand why the root causes happen in the first place, understand why the freaking incident happened in the first place. All of this is actually dealing with people. It's all dealing about economics. It all deals about the impact of society. I care about society. I care all about you. but you gotta have to understand why I'm coming from. It's exactly today is an example why this lecture is so important, of why I decided to commemorate these people who actually lost their lives on April 16th. And I totally never forget for those people who lost their lives, because I think they're actually young high schoolers at the age of 15 through 18 at the time when they're supposed to be going to college. At the same time, they're supposed to be going and bringing personal growth to their families, to their organization, whatever they're going to. This is a time where they're supposed to be building and growing themselves. But unfortunately, they didn't, because of simple tragic incident like this that did not involve with responsibility and accountability. That's the thing I'm trying to tell you today, to the point that you guys need to have more self-awareness and more competent in a multidisciplinary world, to the point that is so crucial in today's world and into the future generation as well. And that is the reason why obviously I'm presenting today to the importance of why public safety, other issues are so interconnected and so impactful to our generation and for future generation as well, because of my time of dedication and knowledge, curious and lifelong learning, and a combination of basically experience from all different novel organizations, including for-profit, that I've been serving as advisory commission and board for every single years. I never forget that. My hardship, my overcoming these resilience, these challenges, there's a lot of challenges along ahead of me, but it's just that I can continue to overcome it. And I think a lot of people don't have the same capacity what they have for me, but overcoming these actually helped me out a lot as a person, but also in professional development. And this is one of the exactly the reason why I'm telling you today that don't take away the things I learned today, not only the Sewol Ferry, but also my personal challenges and personal growth, to the point that this is the reason why it is so important to be a multidisciplinary approach. Again, I'm not going to go into detail, but I already told you about all the lessons that we learned. This is this really good video from Asian Boss that talked about the whole entire South Korean political history. If you want to learn about that, you can actually type it into the YouTube called Inside the Worst Modern Day Tragedy in Korea, or type in as Asian Boss Sewol Ferry on the YouTube search engine. It should come up like that. I would recommend this video, but not a good thing to actually explain all that. But if you want to understand what exactly what's going on, this single minute by timeline, what was going on in Sewol Ferry at the time, this is a good video for that. It is basically based on a Korean documentary, of course. I'm not sure what it was, but I think they took it from there. But these are the sources I am listing now. And for that, I actually want to end my session here. And basically, I just want to take the time to say that this is a lot of information to take in. And I know today was a hard day to do so, but I was so felt energy and so passionate about, changing people's lives, understanding why it happened in the first place. And because of basically, because of this, what I say, because of my passion and because of my energy and all of this thing that I showed you today was actually a primary example why I'm doing the things that I do for social impact, and also helping other people's lives to change their lives, impact for themselves, for the community, and for the world. And this is one of the reasons why I do so. So I thank you for those people who are actually stayed on throughout the entire lecture. And if you actually didn't have the time to, you could go back and review this video that I lectured. And I'm sorry that I keep but my obviously nose is kind of running right now. It's to the point that it took me a lot to actually trying to prevent from mistakes from happening, whatever, because you may think I was picking my nose, but actually I wasn't. It was actually the running nose that I'm kind of having right now because of allergy. But I think all of the lesson I taught you, take with you, and basically understand that you have a lot of things to learn from today's lesson. And not just the only lesson, but actually it was supposed to be a commemoration event. But understand that I think there's a lot of challenges along the way, especially the young people. And I'm saying this because I think this is why people need to understand why the root causes happen in the first place. That's why you learn history. That's why you learn people, where they're coming from. That's why you learn their backgrounds. That's why you want to learn every people's generation or their backgrounds that they come from. I think this is the reason why it's so important to learn that. And I appreciate it for your efforts to stay on stay on it throughout the entire lecture. And I hope that you have a good rest of your day. And I hope that you will still be safe during the times of coronavirus that is going on at the time. I hope your family is also stay safe too. And to the point that I hope they will remain alive as soon as this coronavirus is over. And then I hope that I will actually be going around the world tour of speaking events to the point that I could be I'm not trying to be rooting out for famous people. I'm not trying to do that. My only job is to impact people and basically understand sharing these lessons to the people of the world, the community, so that way they have a better understanding of what they could take away from this lesson to their own community and basically make a change for their better lives of their future generation. That's what I'm here for. So if you have any questions, you could actually find me on the social media. If you can't, then I think I will show it to you right now. If you just give me a moment, if you just give me a moment, but I will share my social media platforms. If you just give me a moment now, if you just give me a moment. Sorry for unpreparedness on this, but yeah, I basically have the social media handles that you could contact me if you have any questions. Yeah, this is my social media. So yeah, this is my social media, of course. You could actually contact me through here. You could also read my blogs, what I talked about, from Korean history to world history, politics. A lot of different issues that I talk about is actually surrounded from here. I'm all over the place, but this is where you can contact me for more information or want to have one-on-one conversation about, why I'm doing this or why I would say I care about so many issues. If you want to have a deep conversation one-on-one, then you could actually schedule me an appointment through Google Chat. And you could also gonna put my email address. My email address is, this is my business email address. It's jamespeck2 So that's my email address, and hoping that everyone stays safe. And I hope that you will have a great day of your rest of your day. And I'll just leave it there for a few seconds, and I'll end this call. Thank you very much, everyone, for your participation and listening to my lectures. I hope you will have a great day.